In March of 1970, British mountaineer Chris Bonington embarked on an expedition up the Himalayas. In his pocket is the bright red multi-tool, which he keeps with him to work the oxygen tanks as he ascends the south face of Mount Annapurna. These tanks must be left behind before the final ascent, as the terrain becomes too difficult for the extra weight. But the Swiss Army knife is carried all the way to the peak. Bonington uses every implement except the fish scaler, fighting to stay alive in these sub-zero conditions. And despite the exceptional lack of fish, the knife proved vital during what would be a successful climb 8,000 meters into the sky. The capability of a Swiss Army knife goes far beyond simple hand tools. It's a critical piece of survival gear, a collector's piece, a fashion statement, and an EDC essential. But before ever reaching the arsenal of adventurers and astronauts, the Swiss Army knife was forged in an even more intense environment: the combat zone. When the Swiss military began issuing the bolt-action Vetterli rifle during the late 1860s, soldiers were also given a small, flathead screwdriver. This allowed them to take down the gun for basic maintenance and repair in the field, and joined the growing collection of tools, which already included an assortment of knives and can openers. Realizing they needed a solution to their growing gadget overload, the military decided to design a new multi-tool that would integrate all the soldiers' needs into a concise package. This concept was hardly a new idea. Similar products were already being produced in Germany, and ancient Roman travelers' tools had been discovered as far back as 200 AD. But the Model 1890, designed by the Swiss military, would finally bring multi-tools into the modern era. Clothed in darkened oak scales and measuring just 100 millimeters in length, it included a carbon steel drop-point blade, a flathead screwdriver, a can opener, and an awl. After placing an initial order of 15,000 knives with German manufacturer Wester & Co., the Swiss Army began issuing them to soldiers in 1891. It accompanied the Army's new Schmidt-Reuben rifle, replacing the outdated and comparatively clunky Vetterli tools. The real genius of its design was the sandwich-style construction. Swiss Army knives are comprised of several layers, separated by a series of metal liners. Between each liner is a set of tools, as well as a strip of metal, which serves as both a spacer and a lever to help them snap open and closed. A set of brass pins holds the entire thing together and attaches the tools. The result is a high level of modularity. The knife can have as many layers as you want, and different tools can be swapped in and out with ease. The first to take advantage of this modularity was Karl Elsener, who manufactured surgical cutlery in Ibach, Switzerland. He hoped to supply the Swiss military from their home country, but struggled to compete with the high production and cost-effectiveness of German manufacturers. Elsener realized he would need to make some changes to find a more profitable market. In 1897, he modified the spacer design to fit tools on both the front and back of the knife, creating a system that has remained unchanged for the past century. Elsener's modifications allowed the knife to carry 6 tools in just 2 layers, adding features like a corkscrew and secondary blade. Rather than being officially issued to the infantry, these new knives were privately sold to high-ranking Swiss officers who wanted an upgraded product to use for their wine at dinners. The success of Elsener's officer knife brought his company back from the verge of bankruptcy and brought the Swiss Army multi-tool to the pockets of civilians. Elsener would name his company Victorinox, combining his mother's name, Victoria, with the French word for stainless steel, inoxidable. When improving the officer's knife in 1901, Elsener replaced the original bulky oak handles for a more lightweight reddish wood fiber. This also served to make the tool more visible when dropped in the snow, and created an iconic look for the Swiss Army knives, a look that would eventually be borrowed by Victorinox's longtime rival, Wenger. While Victorinox claims to be the original Swiss Army knife, Wenger touts themselves as the genuine Swiss Army knife. The competing brand was a Swiss cutlery company just 150 kilometers from Victorinox in the Delamont Valley. They began producing the soldier's knife in 1893, and the Swiss military would split the contract for multi-tools halfway between Wenger and Victorinox. The two neighbors shared rights to the Swiss Army knife for over a century, though it wasn't officially given that name until the Second World War. Instead, it was known by its Swiss name, Schweizer Offizier Messer. When American soldiers began purchasing them in post-exchange stores while stationed throughout Europe, they were struggling to pronounce the foreign name, and instead simply called them Swiss Army knives, or SAK for short. After the war ended and soldiers returned home with their fancy red multi-tools, the Swiss Army knife was perfectly positioned to achieve a cult-like following in the West, and it wasn't long before world events would facilitate its infamy. On May 1st, 1960, the Swiss Army knife would gain widespread recognition for its problem-solving capabilities during an international crisis. In a time before advanced resolution satellite imagery, the United States resorted to sending high-altitude stealth planes on aerial reconnaissance over Soviet territory. Airman Francis Gary Powers was dispatched on one such mission to investigate rumors of Soviet ICBMs piloting a Lockheed U-2 spy plane. With a flight ceiling of 70,000 feet, it was believed that Powers could glide over and photograph Soviet nuclear facilities without detection, but these beliefs were misguided. After spotting Powers on radar, the Soviets launched 14 S-75 surface-to-air missiles over the Ural Mountains. One of these detonated near the U-2, forcing Powers to eject from the cockpit. The wreckage, the pilot, and a host of American equipment were quickly captured. Among that equipment was the plane's camera system, some basic survival devices, and a bright red multi-tool. The KGB were eager to propagandize the event as much as possible, and therefore labeled the Swiss Army knife as a piece of CIA spy equipment, exhibiting it among the rest of Powers' survival gear as a war trophy. It was here that the Swiss Army knife earned its reputation as a tool for secret agents, spies, and heroes, a role that would be echoed through Hollywood in the MacGyver television series and countless films. As the West began to recognize the Swiss Army knife for its compact capability, it continued to expand its military presence in Europe. In 1976, the West German Bundeswehr commissioned a green nylon-handled model to issue to troops as a utility knife. It came with a unique combo tool that included a bottle opener, file, flathead screwdriver, and a saw, all in one implement. There was even a detachable guard to cover the saw while the other tools were in use. This innovative Swiss Army model remained in service in the German Army until the early 2000s, and colloquially became known as the GAK, or German Army Knife. Consumer versions today have featured even more insane and unusual apparatus. Butane lighters, laser pointers, metal pointers, USB drives, whistles, watches, and more. To keep track of the hundreds of unique models offered, Swiss Army knives are typically divided by length. 58, 91, and 111 millimeters are the most common. They can be further subdivided by the number of layers they include, which is typically 1 to 5, though is technically limitless. Carl Elsner's original corkscrew has remained an iconic piece on many Victorinox models, though it now competes for space with the optional Phillips head screwdriver. Since the knives only have one cutout in the scales, customers are often forced to choose between one or the other tool, dividing the sack scene into two parties. Those in the Phillips head fan club say that they encountered loose screws far more often than they drink wine, while the corkscrew enthusiasts point out that the tool can provide far more utility with just a little creative thinking, using it to untie knots, scrape out grooves, and screw the knife into wood for hanging a tarp. Victorinox also sells a number of add-ons that utilize the corkscrew as a storage space for things like a miniature eyeglass screwdriver or a fire starter kit. In order to appease proponents on both sides of the debate, there are a number of different identical models that swap between the two tools. The Huntsman and Fieldmaster, for example, are exactly the same, except that one features the corkscrew and the other has the screwdriver. I've left an affiliate link to both in the description below if you'd like to cast your vote and help support the channel at the same time. Unfortunately, the Swiss Army knife's diverse toolset would be its downfall in 2001. A primary market for Victorinox was the duty-free shop found in airports around the world. Travelers waiting for their flights could pick up the useful multi-tool to aid them on their journey. But following the attacks on September 11th, these items were banned from airport shelves. Swiss Army knife sales fell dramatically as a result, putting both companies at risk of bankruptcy. Wenger tried to fool airport security by putting their knives in a can. When this strategy failed, they were absorbed by Victorinox in 2005. The now sole producer of Little Red Tools introduced the Jet Setter series, a handful of TSA-friendly bladeless models featuring only a combo tool, scissors, and sometimes a USB drive. But Victorinox's real path out of financial trouble was through the lucrative market of military contracts. Entering the 21st century, Germany decided it was time for a redesign of the original German army knife, which had been relatively unchanged since the 1970s. They wanted a new model that featured many of the same tools, but with the addition of a locking blade that could be opened with one hand. Returning to their original military roots, Victorinox responded with a 111mm knife. It featured a more ergonomic silhouette, with a liner-locking serrated blade, wood saw, and a handful of other implements. This model would end up being adopted not only by Germany, but also tested by the military of countries like Austria, Saudi Arabia, Thailand, and even the United States. The civilian version of the tool, called the Trekker in North America, is nearly identical to that used by the Army, but with the addition of Victorinox's classic toothpick tweezer combo. This modern sack platform has since been used for a handful of other tool combinations, including models like the Skipper, Workchamp, and my personal favorite, the Cheese Master. And yet, even with all the countless combinations of fondue forks and survival gear, some sack enthusiasts still venture farther to build the perfect multi-tool. The sandwich construction lends itself well to modification, allowing pieces to be exchanged between many different models. Although the brass pins make it difficult to disassemble a Swiss Army knife, anyone equipped with a little ingenuity and a power drill can add features like pocket clips, custom scales, and any unique combination of tools to create the ultimate aftermarket pocket knife. Additionally, the Dragonox is a popular modification that combines the larger blade from a Spyderco Dragonfly with a standard Victorinox, creating an even stronger, more capable one-handed tool. The Swiss Army knife has had a massive impact over the centuries, not only on everyday carry, but on world history. From the peaks of the Himalayas to spy missions over Soviet territory, and even aboard the International Space Station, the iconic red tool has found a place in the survival gear of every adventurer and in the heart of every knife enthusiast. Thanks for watching, and subscribe to hear more knife stories like this.